We do have some time at the end for questions, so can I ask you make a note if you have any of them, drop them in the chat window if you have access, and we can answer them at the end of the session if that's okay. Brilliant. So let's get started with the intros. My name is Jack Thompson. I'm the Microsoft Partner Manager here at Visual. I'm really pleased to bring this podcast to you with our partner Microsoft. I'm joined in person by Tom and Jamie, and remotely Justin from Microsoft. Over to you, Tom and Jamie, for intros, if that's okay. So pass it, that's Justin.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Tom Edgerton. I'm the DevOps Workload Coordinator here at Visual, and driving DevOps culture, and also responsible for a DevOps team here at Visual, kind of comprising of DevOps engineers, software engineers, infrastructure engineers, and some software testers.
Yeah, and straightforward, I'm Jamie Hunt, and I'm one of the DevOps engineers within Tom's team.
My name's Justin Davis. I'm the business group lead at Microsoft for application innovation, and that covers everything from PaaS services, Azure DevOps, and GitHub as well.
So obviously, Justin, having done the intros, are you able to get a bit of insight from Microsoft side on, I guess, DevOps and the story behind that? Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So from and across kind of our customer base, really, when we see customers adopting cloud, I think there are two challenges really that people usually have. One is what we call a landing zone, which is kind of the underlying governance around security, who's allowed to do what within Azure, and what does the culture look like in terms of adopting cloud. And the second challenge that we see customers having is really, well, once I've got my landing zone sorted out and I have access to cloud and I can spin up virtual machines using the Azure portal, it really comes to, how do I do this time and time again? I used to work in financial services before I joined Microsoft, and it would usually be a mad rush on a Sunday to be able to deploy all of the new services that we needed for the markets to be able to open on the Monday morning. And as crazy as this sounds, a lot of those deployments actually failed because they were just manual steps. Things could go wrong all of the time. And when you start looking at what DevOps and Azure DevOps specifically can provide, it provides an automated and consistent way of being able to instantiate your infrastructure, to deploy your applications, and to make sure that you actually have a governance framework in place to be able to make sure that on that Sunday night, when you hit that button, everything happens in exactly the same structured way that you've tested time and time again. And whilst we see the adoption of DevOps, and I think the team from Visual will go through this, is the intersection of the people, process, and tools. They are the three pillars of that. But how they get implemented and how they get adopted by a customer is absolutely critical for the success of that. And so when you look at the culture of an organization and being a DevOps-focused organization, one of the first things that you need to do, once you've got your tooling, once you understand kind of what your processes are and what you're going to deploy, what the size of your VMs are, is really looking at the cultural side of adopting DevOps. So usually with DevOps, you have multidisciplinary teams. So that could be ops people, security people, storage, application developers, project managers. They all have to work together to be able to provide a level of value for the business, whether that's in response to regulators or in response to customer demand. And so if those teams work together, and if what they do in a manual way to be able to do the deployment of an application or a service can actually be codified and repeated, and everyone can look at exactly what that process is, and you can put control gates in each bit of that step if needed for somebody to be able to have audit capability to be able to say, yes, I'm happy for this deployment to take place. It dramatically reduces the risk that you have when you're doing these deployments. And when you reduce that risk, it means that actually you can deploy many, many more times than you would do previously. So this whole idea of fail fast, of deploying into production multiple times per day, the fail fast aspect is, yes, we can automate it and getting into production quicker. But the failing element of it is that if something goes wrong, and we are all human, you could deploy an application which has a bug, you can deploy an application which isn't integrated correctly with a backend database. If that problem does happen, you don't want to manually go into production and fix it. You want to be able to go back, fix the problem on the left-hand side, closer to the developer or the application owner, and then get that deployed in a standard, trusted, repeatable fashion so that you know that you can deploy quicker. And those are just a couple of highlights really in terms of where we see the power of DevOps and how it's applicable to customers. It's it's not easy to be able to, take yourself from being maybe a traditional waterfall-based organization to a much more agile DevOps-based organization. And that's really where the likes of Visual, who have a wealth of experience with implementing DevOps practices for Microsoft customers, comes in. They've done this time and time again. They see the challenges, they see the cultural implications of where customers have been slowed down trying to adopt this. And so really, I think this webinar is absolutely fantastic to be able to take you on that journey, to see the power of DevOps, to be able to instantiate your infrastructure, to be able to implement that governance, and really to be able to see what can automation do for you. So I just want to say thank you very much to the team at Visual for putting the webinar on. It's a great session, so thank you very much, and good luck with your DevOps journey, everybody.
Bro, thank you very much then, Justin. So leading on quite nicely from what Justin was talking about. And so I'm Tom, guys, as I mentioned, I'm the DevOps Workload Coordinator here, so really driving that DevOps culture. And what I'd like to do for you guys today is run you through 2 demos. So I've got a demo which is focusing on infrastructure as code release and looking at an app service specifically, so something that can be quite simple within Azure DevOps, just to show you the power of it really, and get you to start challenging where you could use that within your organisations. And I've also got another demo planned on agile planning. So I think Justin alluded to some of the focus that DevOps has on agile projects and changing the face of the way you do projects, coming away from waterfall. So I just want to show you how that might look within planning, particularly for project managers as well. But I just wanted to start off with a little slide just to reiterate what DevOps is. So apologies to the guys who are aware, but I just want to quickly run through that just to provide a little bit of context when we come on to some of the demos. So what is DevOps? So DevOps is a union of people, processes and tools. It's a way to create multi-skill and purpose teams that work together with shared and efficient practices and tools. I think everyone would agree when we think of a traditional developer, they've got their own tool set, whether that be Visual Studio and working from there and compiling builds, and you've got your ops engineers who will work within their cloud services or anything like that. And DevOps is a way of bringing everyone together, using that same tool set, everyone the same insight, and also allowing people to pick up tasks for other areas of the business that they might not usually do. So some of the essential DevOps practices include agile planning. So as I mentioned, agile planning is just thinking a little bit differently around how you're going to do projects, planning it in shorter sprints, thinking about what can be achieved in the quickest amount of time. Continuous integration, continuous delivery. So continuous integration is all around building as soon as any changes have been made to code. And then when those changes are made quickly, the build can soon find out whether they're still going to, whether builds are still going to succeed, if they're going to fail. It's identifying those issues quickly. And the continuous delivery is about making sure that every time a build succeeds, it goes on to actually deliver that and deploy that, whether that to be a dev environment, a UAT environment, a prod environment, whether it's sequential, it works really well. And then the final one that's quite an essential practice really within DevOps is monitoring of applications. So it's all well and good being able to use all these tools and deploy quickly, but how are you actually monitoring that afterwards? Are you monitoring the effectiveness? Are you making sure that product and application owners are still happy with that? Now, what advantages does it provide? So governance is a big one, and I think it can't really be understated when you think about governance, about making sure that only the right people are deploying into your cloud environments, and when you're making sure that it's gone through the correct approval processes. DevOps really helps with this kind of stuff, and with all the audit trails and audit history around deployments, it makes it really easy to crack down when changes are made. And that ties in really closely with change control, because if you can see exactly when someone was making changes and why they've made those changes, your change advisory boards will absolutely love that, and it's a great tool set to support those kind of conversations. And it's a tool set in one central place. So I spoke a little bit around this, but being able to bring multiple teams into one place and use one single tool just gives so much more insight into what the rest of the team are doing, and stops people working on multiple tools that might be costing lots of different money. Faster deployment. If you can deploy faster, more than likely you're going to fix issues faster, you're going to get products rolled out sooner, and DevOps really does help with that. So that being said, what DevOps toolset do we use at Visual? So you have to find a DevOps toolset that works for you, but we're really pushing Azure DevOps. As a Microsoft partner, we love Azure DevOps, and we're using it across the whole business due to the different services it provides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the demo up for you guys, and I'll start off with the infrastructure as code one. So there might be a little bit going on the screen, but I'll just try and keep it to what I'm going to show you today. And as mentioned, that's just a web app deployment with a few tests at the end of it. Cool. So here we are into the demo project, and it's Jarkar's demo 002. So this is a project within Azure DevOps, and projects are a good way of isolating different pieces of work away from others. So you might separate those by customers or by project work, and that's typically the ways we see them divided. Now, Jarkar's, if you are wondering what on earth that is just Visual's version of Contoso for Microsoft. It's just what we use for demo purposes. You can see the overview on the left-hand side and also the content on the right. And what the overview section is for is just to give a bit of insight into what that project is. And we find it a good way to manage access control. So you can see below the name of the users, when their access started, how long that access is for, and when it was revoked, and a few comments about those people. So that can be quite a good way to manage access control. You've got boards on the left-hand side, which supports the agile planning, and I'll come on to a separate demo for that afterwards. So we'll leave that for the time being. And then the two things that I want to be showing you within this demo are repos and pipelines. So repos is your code repository. It's where you store everything, whether that be in a GitHub kind of library or a Team Foundation server, which is kind of legacy now. We're trying to push that Git repository. And this is where you'll store your infrastructure as code files, whether that's JSON files, Terraform files, or if you're thinking from a developer standpoint, where they're going to store everything they need for their applications they're deploying. So we'll go into repos, and I'll show you the two files that we're going to look at using to deploy today. Cool. So in our Git repository, we've got a web app folder, and then we've got these two files here, which is where the magic happens. So we've got the Azure deploy .json file, and this is just essentially saying what you're going to deploy, what service is it, and with what settings. Now, if you've ever been in the Azure portal, you can export a JSON template from resources you currently have deployed, and that can be quite a good way to get into infrastructure as code and understand how JSON works if you're not too familiar with it. But you can also build those templates up from scratch, and that's something we kind of recommend and have been doing using tools like Visual Studio integrated with Azure DevOps. So this is your file anyway that's telling you all around the settings and what that app's going to be doing and what settings are going to be applied. You then have a parameters file. So your parameters file is what's dynamic about this app. So if you're thinking you want to reuse these templates, if you make the Azure deploy JSON file as big and as powerful as you can, the parameters file then can just be a tiny thing that when someone wants to deploy an app service, they just change one small parameter, deploy, and it's a nice and easy, smooth process. So in this case, we've just got the web app name, which is RizWeb app demo, and that's just the name of the web app, and that's literally all we've specified on a separate deployment. Then below that, we've got a few different files, and the only ones that are really of any relevance for this particular demo is the Azure deploy.test and the invoke pester. So these are some pester tests that we've created. So they're PowerShell scripts, and what they do is once we've deployed this app service, they just go and validate it. So they go in and make sure it's deployed to the right resource group, make sure that the web app's online, and a few things like that. There's more you can do with that, but we've just set out some similar tests to show you kind of the power of it, really. So that's your repos and your code repository. So from there, we'll pop into pipelines and releases. So this is where you're actually deploying this infrastructure as code. Where's it actually going? And we've got a release that's ready made. And as you can see on the right-hand side, there's a complete audit history. You've got all the changes that have been done, when they've been done. And it tells you whether they've succeeded or not, which can be quite useful. I'm just going to go into edit to show you what I suppose makes up this release and how we actually go about that. So as part of a release, there's two major functions really. On the left hand side, there's your artifacts. So you're thinking, where are you taking files from? Where are you taking that code from? So that could be the repository that I just showed you that we're using for this particular demo. Or if you're thinking more as a developer and from that kind of standpoint, maybe you've just done a build, it's compiled successfully, and you want to release that. So you'd use a build as an artifact. So it's something that you want to use to actually release. Then on the right hand side, you have the stages. So the stages are essentially where you want to release to, what you want to do, what you want to change, anything like that really. And the way we typically see stages broken up for customers among other people are in a dev, UAT and prod style manner. So deploying to the dev environment first, making sure it works, pre-prod or UAT, and then moving on to production. And that's typically where we see stages. But for this case, just because it's a demo app service, we've just got the the one non-prod stage and one afterwards. So I'll just talk you through the 4 steps involved. So the first step is for we're taking from Azure Key Vault. So for this particular case, we want to use Azure Key Vault. For those who aren't aware, Azure Key Vault is a great place to store secrets and keys within Azure, and that can be passwords, it can be recovery keys, it could be anything of that nature really. And it's a way of just making sure that you're not typing out these passwords or keys in plain text in case anyone was to ever see those. You don't want to be doing that. It's best practice not to, so we use Key Vault. So then there's a secrets filter. So that's just taking what secrets on that Key Vault we want, so we can specify them by a secret name. In this case, we've used an asterisk. We're just going to take them all because we've just got a couple within there. The next stage is actually deploying the ARM templates that we've showed you within the repository. And for this, really, there are multiple ways to do it. You can do a simple resource group deployment and just specify the 2 files. For this particular case, we've used PowerShell, so we can tie it in quite nicely with the pester test that we'll show you afterwards. But if you're thinking it might be a little bit difficult, you're not to use the PowerShell, there are plenty of easy ways to deploy JSON files. This particular script is just creating a new resource group deployment, and it's specifying the JSON and parameters file that we've used earlier on, and it's just going to go ahead and deploy all of that. Then we're going to validate the deployment using the pester tests. So this is just picking up the pester test script that I showed you in the repository. It's going to run through that and just put out a little output in PowerShell. Now, because that's not the most readable thing in the world, what we do is we just publish those test results to XML to show you how that might look and give a little bit more of a user-friendly results package. So what we'll do now we've shown you what the web app looks like and how that deployment's made up. I'm just going to go ahead and create it so you can see what's involved in the actual release deployment. We create release. And we'll go into the logs for this just so we can watch it as it goes. So it's just going to initialize the job first of all, and then it will go on to download the artifact. So just making sure that it can find the location that we've specified. So in this case, the code repository. Just making sure it can see it and that it exists. Once it's done that, it will go on to actually taking the keys from Azure Key Vault and deploying the ARM templates. This is probably the longest step involved because it's actually got to go through the file, validate it, and then deploy it within the Azure environment. So we'll just give that a few moments to complete. Cool, so that's deployed, and now it's just going to validate that deployment using the pester tests. So just run through and check those things that we mentioned around, has it been deployed to the correct resource group? Is it going where we're expecting it to? Is the web app actually online since it's been deployed, or is it off? Has it got any problems? And also we've just set up some IP filter tests as well. So we've put in a few test IP addresses just to make sure that we can actually kind of connect to that firewall and set those IPs up. And then we'll just wait for it to publish those results so I can show you how that looks, and we can get a bit of peace of mind around the deployment. So brilliant. So our job succeeded, our release is completed, and our web app's gone. And in that time, you could have gone and got a cup of coffee, you could have got a glass of water, anything really. And it's really quick to do, as you can see. And it's not really much quicker when you're deploying hundreds of resources, unless it's a resource that takes a lot longer to deploy. It generally is a short amount of time. And once you've set that up once, it's just really easy to redeploy that. So let's go back to, in fact, I'll show the test results first, the XML file that we've just published. So if I go into here, it takes us into Azure DevOps and our test plans. And as you can see on the right hand side, all tests have passed. So all good news from our side. And if you go into the test results, it gives you a little bit more information around the tests that have been run. So the web app should actually be running. It should have the correct resource group. It has, and it should have the restricted IP addresses and etc. So it's great news. That's all deployed, and then we'll just show you the web app just to kind of validate that. So on this side now, we've got the web app. It's sat there. It's running within Azure, and if we just go into there, I can just show you on the networking tab. Got the access restrictions, and those IPs are in there that we specified earlier on. So it's done everything we expected it to, which is great news. So again, that was just a simple demo really on how you could start to think about infrastructure as code and how easy that can be using Azure DevOps. And once it's been set up, it's just at your fingertips then. It's not going to take you very long at all. What I'd also like to show you next is just a little bit of a boards demo. So I want to go through how we've been using the features within Azure DevOps for agile planning and thinking about sprint planning as well. So I'll show you this. So we've got a separate demo for this particular section, and what we'll do is we'll jump straight into the boards. So the boards are compiled of work items. So if we go into the work items are a way of creating tasks or creating ideas really within this one space. And work items can be many different things. So if I'm starting at the bottom, which is probably quite logical, there can be user stories. So a user story is typically a user requirement. So if you're meeting a requirement on a project, you might create that as a user story and then think about how you're going to meet that. And then you might set up a task. So how you're actually going to create, how you're actually going to meet that requirement. So if you're deploying code to an application server, how are you actually going to do that? You've got to prepare the code. You've got to migrate from Visual Studio to Visual DevOps. There's a few tasks involved, and that can help you start thinking about how you're going to achieve that. There's a bunch of other work items as well, which if you're thinking more of a development lifecycle, might be a lot more applicable. So if you're thinking of bugs, so if you've got any bugs within the code, perhaps you've got some ideas for a new feature, or you've got any actual crazy issues, it can be a good way to log all this stuff and keep it in one central place. Now I'm just going to go into a task just to show you how that looks. So this is just a demo task, so just call it demo task, hand over to test team. And then as you can see, there's plenty of things that you can put in here to make it, to give whoever's looking into this task as much visibility as you can. So you can have a description to talk to exactly what's required from this task, and perhaps go through some acceptance criteria. There's a discussion point below. So if you're thinking of linking work items between multiple different members of the team, perhaps someone's going on holiday, it can be a good way to tell someone what you've done and give them a little bit of a handover within Azure DevOps and keep that audit trail. You've then got the priority on the right hand side. So when you're thinking about priority of a task, if something's a priority 1, it's going to be quite high importance. Something's a priority 4, it's obviously not going to be. So it's just a way to prioritise your tasks and understand what you need to look at first. Then there's the effort, which is probably the most useful thing we find for project managers, and it's a really useful way to actually manage your team to agile projects. So you can put an original estimate for a task in. So this is in hours, by the way, so it's not 10 days, but 10 hours for that task. You can put how long's remaining on that task, so 10 hours, and how much has been completed. And that actually really helps provide a bit of visibility, which I'll show you in a moment throughout the sprints. So that's how your tasks look, and within work items specifically. But you might be thinking at the minute, that looks quite clunky, I'm not going to go through all that. So how are you actually going to view that, particularly if you're a project manager or someone from a non-technical background? So we use sprints. So for those who aren't aware, sprints is a great way to manage agile projects. You can set yourself a 2-week sprint, a month sprint, and what you do is, the idea is you put all the tasks that you're going to complete in that time within that section, and then you can manage yourself to that. And generally at the end of that sprint, then you'll have something to deliver, whether that's to a customer or internally. Now, the reason we love sprints so much is it just gives a lot more visibility. So here on the left-hand side, we've got the user story, so deploy code to application server. And what you can do is if you drop that down, you'll see all the different other user stories that you'll have associated. With this just being a demo, we only have one user story, but this is a good way of understanding what user stories are left to complete on a project and how long they're going to take. So when we go back and say, you can see the 31 hours, that just basically takes all the tasks that are related to that user story and looks at how long they're going to take. So that can be quite essential to a project manager who's thinking that a requirement needs to be completed this week and they just want to see how long's left on that. Without it kind of eradicates the need for daily calls and things like that. So we typically run our project, we still have weekly calls, we still have ongoing chats with our customers, but by giving them access to Azure DevOps and giving them a little bit more visibility, they can see what they need to know. And particularly for project managers and people from a non-technical background, it's a really good way to bring people up to speed. Now you can set up as many sprints as you want. So if you're thinking of a project, you might need to set up a lot of different sprints for a lot of different areas. We've just got 3 for demo purposes, and as you can see, they all look exactly the same. The other thing that I'll mention around this is how easy it is to look at the tasks. So if it's a new task that's just come in and it needs to still be assigned, it will generally sit within the new queue. Then you've got the active one, so what's actually being worked on this week, what's being worked on as we talk. Resolved, so if it's a bug or something of similar nature, that would perhaps go into the Resolve tab, and then someone can go into there and say, oh, that bug's now been resolved, I can look at testing that again. And then there's a close tab, so if that's a task that you've completed, but it's not necessarily resolved, you might use it for that. So that was just a little bit of an insight into how we're using boards to manage our Agile projects. Now, this is all demo data, but as you can imagine, on a real project, there's a lot more going on, and it's a lot clearer and easier to understand. So those are my 2 demos today, and I hope they've been of some use to show you how visually using Agile planning and also infrastructure as code release deployment today. What I would also just like to quickly do is just run through some customer scenarios, because I appreciate that when you look at this kind of technology, you might sometimes think, I don't know how that relates to me. How does that solve any organisation challenges that we face? So I just want to talk through a few customer stories of where we've managed to look at them adopt DevOps and look at how it's actually improved their processes and automation. So one of our customers who we work with faced a lot of challenges with their virtual data center. So with their virtual data center, which was Azure for this matter, what they've done is, because the cloud was quite new, they've given a lot of people within their organisation free rein. People were going in, creating resources without tags, so we couldn't charge back. It was a little bit gung-ho, and no one really knew what was actually required. And they come to us and said, look, how do we get around this? What's the best way to get around this? So we spoke around our service, which is DevOps as a service, and we spoke about how we could get DevOps implemented for them. Now, what we wanted to do was make sure that when infrastructure release is done, the appropriate tagging's in place so they can do business chargeback. The appropriate approvals are in place, so if something's been released to one subscription that's owned by a business owner, they can approve that before it's released and understand what's actually going in. And also, they wanted to make sure that anyone could release anything, and with our templates that we've been creating for them, it's made it really easy for them to redeploy in seconds. So what we've done is we've set them up a Terraform estate, basically, within Azure DevOps. So we've created it all using infrastructure as code using Terraform, which does differ slightly from JSON. It's probably a little bit easier to get into when you're thinking about infrastructure as code if you're picking it up for the first time. It is in a little bit more of a simple view. Obviously, I am not saying it's simple, but it can be a little bit more easier to get into. And what Terraform is it's all state form. So if you set up infrastructure in a certain way with Terraform, so if you've said that a resource group can't be deleted, you've set up a resource group lock. If anyone tries to change that then within the Azure portal, the next time a release is done from Azure DevOps using Terraform, it will revert all those changes back. So it's a way of making sure that that environment is very controlled. So we've basically transformed their whole virtual data center using infrastructure as code, Terraform, and Azure DevOps. And it's been a real success story. They know where to charge back to their business. They can use templates really easy, and it's just give them so much more governance over their cloud environment. I appreciate though that is also quite infrastructure based. So if you're thinking from a development standpoint and you're thinking how might this help, we've also got another customer. It's a city council that we've been working with, so from the public sector, and they've rolled out a solution recently on a mobile application. And that solution comprises of some logic apps that developers have set up. It's wrapped around in an API management service, and it's got a few other resources as well, like storage accounts, among other things. Now, their challenge was that this environment was extremely complicated, and once it had been set up once, it was really difficult to redeploy that without room for human error. There's a bunch of logic apps with lots and lots of settings, and it's not easy to just go through and redeploy that. So that was one of their challenges. The other challenge was that there was a lot of resources within there that the developers had been creating, and they wasn't too sure whether those resources were still required or not, and I don't think the developers were either. So we come up with a similar style engagement for DevOps, whereby what we do is once the dev environment's been created by developers, we'll actually take that away, produce that as infrastructure as code in JSON, and look at redeploying that then. And then once that's been deployed to dev, it can take a few moments to redeploy to UAT and then live. So whereas before it was taking them days on days to recreate these environments and make sure that everything's right, test it, we've actually taken them on a journey and got them to think about how DevOps culture can drive a little bit of automation for those guys and save them time on their day-to-day jobs. Every release as well has to be approved by their Azure administrator. So it's worked really well for them in terms of governance, making sure it definitely needs to be deployed, and also for getting something rolled out really quickly. So there's some of the customer journeys that we've seen, especially recently, and hopefully that gives you a little bit of context to how DevOps might work for you. So that is the end of my DevOps piece. I'm going to hand over to Jamie, who's going to talk to you around Azure automation. I think Jack mentioned at the start, if you have got any questions, feel free to whack them in the chat, and at the end we can go through them and hopefully give you a little bit more insight.
Cool. Thanks, Tom. So yeah, I'm just going to talk to you about the Azure automation side of things and where that complements DevOps and when to use it and when not to. Essentially, Azure automation provides you the ability to automate your frequent, your time-consuming, your error-prone cloud management tasks. That automation actually helps you focus on work that adds business value. It reduces your errors and it boosts your efficiency, and it can actually help lower your overall operational costs. Automation accounts can actually be integrated with other Azure services, other public systems, and actually managing your end-to-end processes as well. The service is actually used by using graphical runbooks for those who's less familiar with code, but then you've also got PowerShell and Python for the scripters that you've got out there. It's not limited to just your actual cloud environment. With use of a hybrid runbook worker, you can actually deploy your scripts and your automation and some of the other features against on-premise resources, and I'll talk you through that as the demo goes on. So what I'm going to do is just go through a couple of demos and actually run through you all the different parts of an automation account. So to start with, I'll show you just the simplicity of actually creating an automation account. So for people who are unfamiliar, this is the Azure portal. Essentially, this is where you can create some resources. So I've just gone into one of our demo resource scripts that we've got. I'm just going to go into the add section and search for automation. This is where you can see all of your resources that are available to be deployed within Azure. And then you've got the option to create an automation account. It's quite simple, just takes a few parameters, which is going to be your automation account name. So I'll just call this automation demo -02. Choose your subscription, choose your resource group, where you want to deploy that to, and then you've also got the option to choose whether to create a run as account. From a security standpoint, it's probably best not to create a run as account. What's best to do is actually create a service principal with more specific permissions, just so that it is locked down and can only do what it needs to. But for the purpose of the demo, I'm going to just leave it as yes. Essentially, that means that run as account has got sort of full access to be able to do things against your environments. And I'll show you on one of our scripts where that's used later on. So just selecting create on there is straightforward. It literally takes just a few moments. You'll see in the top right hand corner that probably within a second or two, it'll actually create that automation account, which it's already done. And now it's creating the service principal for me as well. So if I just nip into one of the automation accounts that I've previously created, I'll talk through a few of the sections. The first section that we want to talk about is configuration management. So this is where you can actually dynamically collect all of the information about your machines. So essentially you just onboard your machines in here. So you can either add Azure VMs, which if you go on there, it'll tell you all the different VMs that are in your environment and whether they can or can't be onboarded. If they can't, it generally gives you a reason why not. And then once they're in there, it starts actually going through and collecting or creating an inventory of all the different software and any other things about the resources that you've got. So in this example, we've got one machine in there, which is our demo VM. The operating system is Windows, it's on the Azure platform, and that's the last time that it fed us information, which is today, not too long ago. So diving a bit deeper, we can actually see all the software that's installed on all of our machines. So whether you just want to know this for your auditing purposes, or whether you need to know this from maybe a licensing standpoint, you can actually see everything that's installed on that machine. And it also gives you a full breakdown as well. So again, we've got Azure Storage Explorer installed. The version is 1.12. It's by Microsoft. As you can see, it's not just limited to collecting Microsoft applications. You've also got Notepad++ in there, and it tells you what machines that's installed to. So we've just got one in this case, and if you to go into that, it just gives you a breakdown of which machines that's installed against. You've also got a few other things. So these are generally what we're going to look at when we move on to change tracking. So essentially, you can actually monitor certain files, certain registry keys, services, and also with Linux as well. So in this example, this is one that we've created, which is to actually monitor your host file on your machine. If you're unfamiliar with the host file, it's essentially a way to override DNS. So if I was just going to go to visual.com and I wanted it to go to maybe a dev application that I'm running against, so I'd point it to a different IP, and that's where I'd make changes. But as this can obviously have a negative effect on certain things on your end user clients, it's maybe something that we'd like to monitor. It's quite straightforward to set up this additional monitoring, so it's literally just going into your edit settings. By default, you've already got the Linux config file added in there, and if you want to add a Windows file in there, essentially just select add, give it a name, give it the path, and you've also got the option to upload file content. This is really useful if you want to see what changes actually have been made. So when we actually go back and we go into the change tracking side of things, I can actually show you where the host file's actually being changed and it's being collected. So if I search for hosts, as you can see in here, everything is logged. It tells you the time that it was changed. You can see on here that the category was modified. And if I just navigate into that, it gives you a few details that's changed. So the file itself has had a few properties that have been changed. So your file content checksum, your date modified, and your size. And obviously there's been a few changes made to the file itself. If you want to see those changes, you've got the option up here to view file content changes, and that gives you a really good view of actually what's changed between the files. So you can see on the left hand side what it was previously, you can see what it now is on the right hand side. So it's really useful for if you're wanting to have that bit of a view what's changed. If you quickly want to roll back, if it's caused any issues, it's all audited. And essentially this just gets shipped off into a storage account. So that's something that does get configured on your edit settings. When you go into file content, it gives you a bit of the details on your storage account name, and you can unlink that and send it to another one if you want to. Finally, it also tracks your Windows services as well. So you can see if any services are stopped, which may have led to maybe an incident on your side. You can have a view of what was changed, what the previous state was and what the state is now. So on this one, you can see the service state previously was running, and then the value afterwards was stopped, and maybe that's where your issues come from. So it gives you a good overview of what's actually on your machines and what's happening on your machines as well. Finally, in terms of configuration management, so one of the things about DevOps itself and also the power of automation is trying to get quite a consistent state. So you want to make sure that all of your VMs are maybe got the same config, and if they haven't, you might want to do something about it. So this is where the state configuration comes in, which is generally known as DSC, which is desired state configuration. So what we've got on here is we've got one of the machines that we've had in there previously, and we've got a node configuration against that. So essentially what we've done is that we've got a configuration that says, is this a web server or is it not a web server? And depending on the outcome of what you've selected, it'll go and install certain roles, make certain config changes, all automatically. And again, it really helps to have that consistent state. So you can see this machine's compliant and it's not a web server. So if I quickly go into that one, we've got the ability to change some of those things. So as you can see underneath, it's actually regularly checking as well to make sure that it still actually fits that configuration. It's not just a one-time thing that it deploys it. It will actually keep on checking, but there are certain settings that you can do around that. So if I go into assign node configuration, I can actually turn it into a web server, and maybe we do need it as web server now. So by clicking OK, it will then go off and actually apply that new configuration. So as you can see, it's now gone to pending, and that's actually going to go away and try and make sure that all the requirements to confirm that it is a web server are going to be met. What I'll show you is on the edit side of things. You can actually add in ones that are all from the resource gallery. So you've got a lot of different configurations underneath. You've got your parameters that are available to you. And there's also a gallery section on the right hand side from the automation account itself. These are all from the PowerShell community. Some are created by Microsoft. Some are actually added by other members of the community who are actually adding these files in there. So depending on if you just wanted to get some ideas or whether you're after something in particular, it's a really good place to start to see if there's something that actually suits what you need. And all those configurations, once you've uploaded them, they do show in here. So for our web server configuration, you can see that's there, and that's actually got two different compilations of that configuration, and so to define whether it is a web server or it's not a web server. So that one's still pending, so I'll just quickly show you the next section, which is around update management. So update management, traditionally you've always needed on-premise infrastructure, which again brings additional costs, and now Microsoft have released this platform, which is essentially a platform as a service, so you're not paying for any additional infrastructure, and this manages your updates for you. So there's a few ways that you can do this, which is essentially using deployment schedules. So generally you'll have your environment segregated out into different sections, such as test, pre-production, production. We've also got one for our definition updates, which goes to our end user clients. And essentially that's just a breakdown and a collection of all the different machines, and also what updates you want to apply to them. You might have a section of SQL machines which you may want to apply like cumulative updates and stuff to as well. So if I just drop into one of them, you can see all the different settings that we've got available. So in terms of the actual machines that get affected by this, there's two ways that you can do that. So you can select individual machines. You can see that we've got 4 items selected, or you can actually create groups from Azure AD to use in these as well. Once you've got those, you can choose which classifications you actually want to install against the machine. So for ours, we don't want to go to gung ho, so we're just looking for critical updates, security updates, and your generic updates, and we check those on a monthly basis. We've usually be in line with Patch Tuesday, so we'd look at getting all of the new updates rolled out as soon as possible to our test environment, and depending on how that goes, we then roll out to the remaining environments. If you do know that there's any particular updates that are going to have a negative impact on some of your servers, you've got the option to exclude those updates as well. And then, like I mentioned about the monthly settings, you've actually got a schedule which you can select. So you choose when you want that to start. Obviously, we've created this in the past. You can set whether it's just a one-time deployment or whether it's recurring. And you've also got the options to change it to hour, day, week, month. And then you've also got the recurrence of it as well. So it doesn't have to be the same date number each month. You can also have the same day. So you can do second Tuesday, which is something that we do, which second Wednesday, so the day after Patch Tuesday, and that means that we're very up to date with our updates. Another cool thing that's added in there is actually your pre and post configuration scripts. So if you actually want to run something before or afterwards to check how you're getting on, then those are available. Essentially, that links into your run books, which we'll talk about in a moment with process automation. The final settings are just your maintenance window, so how long you want to give for those machines to be able to install their updates and maybe reboot in that time frame. and then you've got the reboot options as well. So if it requires a reboot, it will do, or depending on what services are on there, you might want to set it to never reboot. An example being a Skype front end, you probably want to shut down those services gracefully, so you'll want to do a manual reboot against that, or you can have the option to always reboot it. In terms of actually monitoring that compliance, it's got a really good dashboard. So back on the front, you can see all of the machines that are actually onboarded into this update management solution. You can see their compliance against it. So you can see we've got one server on here that's showing non-compliant, and it gives you a bit of a breakdown as well as why that's non-compliant. And you can see that it's missing a critical update. And then using the tab across the top, you've also got the missing update section. It tells you all of the updates which are missing, what their classification is, how many machines it's missing against, and also it gives you a link to the KB article containing all the information of what that update is going to do and what it's for. Just jumping back over. As you can see now, that configuration has now changed on the VM itself. It's now had all of the required changes to ensure that it is a web server. Some of the things that you can actually set on here is to actually monitor it. So if the state was to change, you can get it to just monitor and notify. You can get it to do nothing, or you could actually get it to manually change it back as well. So if somebody was making changes, and the next time this runs, which I showed you earlier was quite frequent, it would actually set those settings back for you. One of the main things that we do use runbooks for is essentially process automation. So this is where the art of the possible comes in. Essentially, whatever your requirements are as a customer, generally, if it's something that is happening on a frequent basis, then you maybe want to look at automating that to save on time, to save on the chance of having errors, and the chance to save on money as well. So some of the examples that we use is creating a runbook to actually turn machines off. Within Azure, you actually get billed per second, so it's probably a key thing that if a machine doesn't need to be running all day, that you actually ensure that you are turning it on and off as required. Natively, there is an option to turn the machines off in the Azure portal, but there's not one to turn it back on. Obviously, you don't want your guys to be turning up and having to turn that machine on and then having to wait. They can just turn up and jump straight back onto it if you've got a runbook, which is going to turn the machines on straight away. To get some of those ideas, it's the same as the desired state gallery. We've actually got a runbooks gallery, which has got all your different types. So you've got Python scripts in here, you've got your workflow runbooks, your graphical runbooks, you've also got your PowerShell runbooks. So what you can do is you can actually have a look through here, see if there's anything that you need, jump in there, and if it is something that suits you, it's got all of the code in here, so it's worth reviewing that. And then if that's something that you do need, then you can import that into your gallery and use it at a later date. When you go into the runbooks themselves, you generally have a few options for that runbook. So you can see all of the jobs that have happened in the past. You can set it to run on a schedule. All those schedules are listed under shared resources, which I'll show you shortly. And you've also got webhooks as well. So if you want to integrate that with any other tools, such as if you wanted a more frequent schedule, then you can link it with Azure Logic apps, which are able to run on a lot more of a frequent basis. If I show you a schedule on here, you are limited to the amount of times that you can actually run that runbook. So you can see on here, I can set it to recurring, and then I can only do it a few times every hour. But it does actually give you the actual granular times that it's going to run at, whereas creating a webhook, it gives you a HTTPS endpoint, and you call that with the Logic app to be able to run that on a more granular basis. Also using webhooks, you've got the ability to integrate it with maybe an ITSM tooling as well. So if something was to happen, then your ITSM tool may want to log a ticket for it, and then actually call one of your runbooks, which will have a remediation task built into it, and then that'll go and resolve some of your issues straight off the back as well. So very, very useful. In terms of actually editing these, you just go into the edit section, you can see all of the script itself, and you've also got the option for a test pane as well, which it shows you any parameters on the left hand side. You can click start and then it'll actually go through and run that runbook for you. Some of the other things that we spoke about. So I mentioned earlier hybrid workers. So this applies to all of the different solutions within an automation account. So whether it's desired state configuration, inventory management, update management, and also process automation. It's not limited to just your cloud resources. We understand that a lot of people are still running hybrid scenarios where you've got on-premise infrastructure, and we understand that it's probably not straightforward to actually just get rid of those. So using a hybrid worker, essentially you just install that on a VM which has got connectivity to your on-premise resources, and it just acts as a relay. So it essentially will be your single point that everything will route through to be able to run against your on-premise machines. Finally, I'm just going to talk through some of the shared resources, which are quite useful. So, like I mentioned, it shows you all of your schedules, so and what they're linked to. So they'll be linked to some of your runbooks. If you're used to actually running scripts on premise, then you'll probably understand that there are modules that generally you'll need. So if you're running commandlets against Azure, then you'll probably be using the Azure modules which are available for you. So to be able to use those, you will need to install them into the automation account. And there is a modules gallery available online, similar to the runbook gallery, where all of your modules will be located. If they aren't there, then you can actually upload them separately. The same with Python. Again, you've got Python packages that you can upload. And then some of the final things that I'll just talk through. So like Tom mentioned in one of his earlier demos, if you actually want to pass credentials through to some of your scripts, you don't want to be showing those in plain text. So you've actually got the option to create credentials. You can call it whatever you want. So if I just call that cred, for example, you can put your username in, and then I'll show you that the password itself is actually hashed out. So there's no way of people actually seeing what that password is. And then within your scripts, you just use a commandlet of get-automation ps credential, and that actually pulls your credentials through for you and handles the authentication side of things. One of the other things that I mentioned was the Azure Runners account at the start, which is what you can choose to or not to use. Essentially, this is being used as authentication against your environment. So I'll quickly link back into the runbook that we've got, and you can see that this is the Azure Runners connection. Essentially, that's used for your service principal to be able to authenticate and do things in your environment. So within this particular runbook that we've got, it's got a piece of code on there which by default it's not going to be able to actually run against any of your resources, but what this wants to do is actually turn machines on and off depending on when it's being patched. So what this does is actually gets your service principal connection, which it uses again some of your Azure automation commandlets, where it brings in your automation credential, and that's the Azure Runners connection that was specified earlier. It then uses that to authenticate against your environment, and then it's got the ability to go on and shut those machines down or turn them on depending on what it needs to do pre or post patching. Another useful thing for authentication is your certificate side of things. So if you are using certificate authentication, you can upload certificates in here, and you can use that if you're authenticating against the REST API that might need certificates if you're doing regular reporting. And we've also got the variables section as well, which again, you've got the options to encrypt or maybe not encrypt. This again is a key thing if you want to hide certain things. So one of the main examples that we do use is if you've got a script which is maybe speaking to a SQL database, you'll need connection strings in there, and generally that connection string will contain a username and password. So we usually put it in here, give this a nice name, which is relevant to that connection string, post your value in for that connection string, and then set it to encrypted. Again, there's no chance of that being seen in plain text then, and it's just passed through in your scripts. So that's essentially automation accounts. It is the art of the possible. It just depends on your requirements. Anything that you're doing on a regular basis, anything you think that's error prone, then it is really useful to invest some time in it and actually get some of these into these automation accounts. So I'll just hand back over to Jack.
Lovely. So yeah, that was great, guys. Thank you. So I mean, I hope that was useful and gives you a flavour of what DevOps and automation can do. We just wanted to sum up with some recommendations or next steps that we'd advise. So firstly, we'll be sending out a feedback form. please do respond. This helps us tweak our sessions to see what was useful, what have you learned, and if it's worth expanding on. Secondly, we'll be in touch to see if you need time with our DevOps team to go through specific needs and where DevOps could help with your organisation. We also have a DevOps assessment where we can review the tooling with you, provide insight, perform a gap analysis, and develop a DevOps plan on how to roll out. We can also send it on with a feedback form as well. And finally, we have our main event hosted here at Visual HQ on March 18th called Visual XT. The DevOps team will be there running a similar session on, so do come along if you want to know more. We also have a load more sessions and all sorts of Microsoft tech, from deep dives into Azure, cloud security, Surface, and much more. If you need anything else, please do reach out to us on the kind of following channels. And with that said, we'll now open for a Q&A. So feel free to put questions in the window or on mute mics, whichever's easiest. I know we've already got some in the chat window, so probably want to have a quick look at those if those okay, guys.
Yeah, go for it.
So it looks like, however, so question: CI and CD is a great step forward, but moves away from waterfall and infrequent deployments. How have you seen the ITIL release management process move to support frequent deployments?
Yeah, so I did see that one. So I suppose with continuous integration, continuous deployment, really, the tools they're designed deliberately to try and move away from infrequent deployments, which doesn't quite align with your traditional ITIL processes, I suppose. But I think if it hasn't already, ITIL will start to fall in line with that, especially with it being such a huge governing body for the industry. But I suppose by building and deploying frequently with CI and CD, as long as you've got a well-structured in-pipeline testing strategy, so testing that afterwards, automated testing, test cases, anything like that. The idea is that you catch the bugs faster and you can release to market quicker, you can release it internally quicker, and hopefully empower your end users that way. Hopefully that answers the question, but I have got a pretty decent link. Microsoft have done a really good job of putting their spin on what continuous integration and continuous deployment is, and they've got some videos and some material elsewhere which might answer a few more questions. So I might just pop that in the chat afterwards, and if you want to use it, you can. If you don't have time, that's cool, but hopefully that'll give you a little bit more insight.
Lovely, thanks, Tom. I don't think any more questions come through on the chat window, but I know we had a couple of emails through couldn't join. So around the sprints boards, this one probably for you, Tom.
Yeah.
But as a manager, so how do you track performance and time via those sprint boards?
So to kind of track your team when you're thinking about DevOps and working agile, you'll manage your team 2 sprints, and you'll look at how long's left in those sprints. So particularly the boards that I showed earlier with the time value and the user stories, they're the kind of things really you use to manage your team. And as long as those user requirements are being met and there's something to deploy to, you can just keep an eye on the time within there. And the idea is that it's so easy to check and check what's left that it is really easy to manage your team too.
Cool. I suppose I'd add in there that I suppose that helps track effort and holding people to account, and what they're spending their time on and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's really easy to just see what they've been spending their time on. And the idea with the boards within Azure DevOps is if they're updating their work items every day with how long's left on tasks or what tasks have been completed, you've got great visibility of what they have been doing.
No, great, lovely. So that one answered that, and then this one looks like for you, Jamie, if that's okay. So I guess it comes back to the PowerShell community that was raised. So, Is there a security risk on the PowerShell community when you download actions from that site?
So there is a level of control around what actually gets uploaded to the PowerShell gallery. So you actually need to be a member of that community, which is go through sign up. And then when it is that someone comes to upload a script, there are actually some automated tasks that are ran from the PowerShell community side of things, which is essentially to make sure that the script works, that it does what it's expected to do. But the one thing that we would stress, and I think it's the same with Microsoft, that essentially any scripts that you do run against your environment, you need to do in a controlled manner. So release into your dev environment first if possible. You probably do need somebody with PowerShell skills to actually understand what those scripts are doing, to make sure that it isn't going to have any adverse effects. So there is always a risk, but the scripts have already gone through a bit of a process, so they should be safe to a point.
No, lovely, sounds good. I hope that one answers that one. I say, it looks like we've got no more questions coming through, so I guess we'll close off from here. But obviously, thank you for taking the time to join this morning. And as I said, afterwards, we'll send out the feedback and we'll send over the recording. So lovely. Thank you for your time.
Thanks all.